Imagine, just for a second, that you are 16 years old. You're trapped in this horrific fire at your grandfather's sprawling, super isolated estate, right on the jagged cliffs of the Oregon coast.
Oh, it is such a terrifying setup right from the jump.
It really is. Because the fire is just absolutely, it takes everything. It takes the historic house, it takes the live-in staff, your imposing grandfather, and tragically, it takes your mother.
Yeah, and it takes you too.
Exactly. You actually die in that fire. Your heart literally stops beating for exactly 17 minutes and 11 seconds.
Which is such a specific, haunting detail.
Right. But then, against all medical probability, you wake up. You're in this sterile hospital bed.
Mm.
And waiting for you, sitting rigidly in this cheap blue vinyl chair, is an estate lawyer.
Just waiting to pounce, basically.
Seriously.
Mhm.
He looks at you, this newly orphaned teenager who literally just returned from the dead, and he offers you an inheritance of unimaginable wealth.
Mhm.
We're talking tens of millions of dollars, limitless resources.
But you look at him, right, and you
Wow.
look at the conditions attached to that money.
Yeah, and you completely refuse to touch a single penny of it. You choose instead to just disappear into the overburdened foster care system. You basically choose grinding poverty.
And why? Because, with absolute certainty that the true cost of that inheritance is, well, your soul.
It's such a heavy hook. Welcome to the deep dive. I am so thrilled you're joining us today because our mission is to explore the dark, hypnotic, and frankly, terrifying world of Only Spell Deep.
It is a phenomenal gothic thriller and dark fantasy novel by USA Today bestselling author Ava Morgyn.
Yes, and we are going to be unpacking a story that completely blurs the line between a profound psychological breakdown and a terrifying supernatural awakening.
Oh, absolutely. It blends, generational trauma, these innate, undeniable magical abilities, and this incredibly ancient primordial mythology.
All set against that moody, rain-soaked, almost claustrophobic backdrop of modern-day Seattle and the haunted Oregon coast.
And what's crucial to understand right off the bat, and honestly what makes this deep dive so compelling, is that we aren't just looking at some fantasy breakdown of a rigid magic system.
Right, it's not just like categorizing spells and wands here.
No, not at all. This is a profound examination of feminine rage. It's about the suffocating, inherited weight of family legacy, and it deeply explores what happens when we try to violently cage the darkest, most untamed parts of ourselves.
Exactly. The book asks this really profound, almost paralyzing question. If you're born with an innate, incredibly destructive power, a power that has historically brought absolute ruin to the women in your family, do you bury it deep inside yourself just to survive in the mundane world?
Or do you surrender to it, right?
Right.
And risk the total consumption of yourself and everything you have ever loved?
It's so intense. Let's start right there in that hospital room because it sets the entire psychological foundation for our protagonist.
Yeah, her given name, the name tied to that sprawling estate, is Judith Phoebe Cole. But she goes by Jude Clark.
She adopts this remarkably plain, unremarkable fake last name just to completely sever herself from her past.
And when we first meet her in the present timeline of the novel, which is 17 years after that fire, she is essentially a shell. She's an empty vessel.
She actually describes herself as having no yolk, like just the egg white holding no real substance.
Wow, yeah.
She's just been existing, treading water for almost 2 decades since that fire at her grandfather's estate, which is called Solidago.
And Jude survived the blaze, but her magic specifically, her pyrokinesis, innate ability to manifest and control fire, seemingly died that night.
Right, the trauma was just so immense that the magic retreated so far inward she can't even access a single spark of it.
Which brings us back to that pivotal hospital scene with James E. Lampett. He's the estate attorney for her grandfather, McAllister Bates.
Oh man, that guy. We really need to look at the mechanics of what he was offering and why Jude ran from it.
Yeah, because Lampett shows up with this absurdly large, bulletproof silver briefcase.
Which is intimidating enough on its own.
Right. And he tells this traumatized 16-year-old girl that she is the sole beneficiary of a massive reality-altering fortune. Real estate portfolios, stocks, liquid capital.
But the money is totally weaponized. It comes with 3 incredibly specific, chilling conditions. And these aren't your standard, you get the money when you turn 21 trust fund rules.
No, these are carefully constructed psychological traps.
What were the specific conditions again? I know the first one was about her name.
Yeah, the conditions are meticulously designed by her deceased grandfather to strip Jude of her autonomy, even from beyond the grave. So first, Lampett tells her she must keep her maiden name, Cole, even if she marries.
Which is just wild.
It was McAllister Bates's rule to preserve the original character of the women in his life. He viewed them as assets to be branded.
Ugh, gross.
Yeah.
And the second one?
Second, she must rebuild the Solidago estate exactly as it was before the fire, down to the original specifications, and she must maintain it as her primary legal residence.
Which is just cruel. I mean, think about it. Hey, rebuild the house where you literally burned to death and your mother died, and then live in it forever.
Exactly. It's a prison sentence disguised as a gift. And third, and this is where the Gothic dread really sets in, Lampett opens that bulletproof case to reveal a portrait of her grandmother, Aurelia.
The portrait that survived the fire.
Yes. It is impossibly, unnaturally untouched by this devastating fire that literally melted steel beams. Jude is commanded to take physical possession of this haunted portrait, keep it with her for the rest of her days, and eventually she is legally required to will it to her own biological descendant.
It's so deeply unsettling. She looks at this lawyer who genuinely thinks he's handing her a golden ticket, and she chooses to just walk away into nothingness.
She looks at the money, the house, the portrait, and she recognizes the shape of a cage.
Yeah, she knows that taking that money means stepping right back into the prison her grandfather built.
Ava Morgyn uses the physical architecture of Solidago itself as this brilliant, heavy metaphor for patriarchal control and trauma. McAllister Bates didn't build a warm, loving home for his wife, Aurelia. He built a fortress.
He built a literal cage.
Exactly. The house was suspended in this rigid, museum-like condition. It was a shrine to his obsession with possessing her, and effectively a prison that she could never leave.
So Jude's refusal in that hospital room is her ultimate, desperate act of rebellion. She looks at the systemic, bureaucratic abuses of the state foster system and decides, yes, I will take that over the bespoke, customized, inescapable abuse of my family's legacy.
Because that legacy isn't just emotional trauma, right? It is supernatural trauma. It is incredibly heavy.
Yeah, as we get into the lore, we learn that the Cole women are what her grandmother Aurelia called elemental witches.
Now, we need to be clear about how magic works in this universe.
Yeah.
They aren't mixing potions in cauldrons or waving wands and reciting Latin.
Right, there's no Hogwarts here.
No, they are born to this magic. It's in their blood, their DNA, their bone marrow. But it comes with a terrifying generational curse of magic, gone horribly, catastrophically wrong.
The text gives us this rich, dark, historical lineage to prove that point, too. The magic of the Cole women always twists. Like, for example, there was Beata in 17th century Sweden.
Oh, that story's so tragic.
It really is. The local villagers knew she had an affinity for water, so they begged her to bring rain during a devastating drought. She tried to help, but instead of a gentle rain, she brought 5 continuous days of unnatural, heavy flooding.
It just washed away homes, drowned livestock, ruined the land.
Yeah, and the very people she tried to save ended up turning on her, and she was beheaded and burned.
And it doesn't stop there. There was Meg, this Victorian governess, who thought she could use a simple charm to seduce the lord of the house.
But the charm warped.
Badly. She ended up seducing the lord, his wife, and half the domestic staff into this manic obsession. She ended up committed to a sanatorium.
And then there's Avis, a 1920 psychic whose precognitive gifts drove her to madness and landed her in a federal prison for murder.
They are a lineage defined entirely by power that ultimately destroys the wielder.
I want to pause on that for a second, actually, because this is where the mechanics of the magic system get really tragic. If they have all this immense reality-bending power, like the ability to summon storms or bend minds, why are they always the victims?
It's a great question. Why are the Cole women the ones ending up in sanatoriums, rotting in prisons, or burning at the stake?
To me, it's like having a fully operational nuclear reactor built inside your chest, but you were born without any control rods.
Oh, wow. That's a really stark way to look at it.
Right. You have access to all the kinetic energy in the universe, but you possess absolutely no mechanism to safely direct it. So a catastrophic meltdown isn't just a possibility. It's a biological inevitability.
That is a brilliant analogy. It perfectly captures the danger, and it deeply contextualizes the absolute terror that Jude's mother, Winnie, carried every single day of her life.
Because Winnie saw what the magic did to Aurelia.
Exactly. So Winnie told Jude from a very young age, "The devil comes with sweet words, but her tongue is forked. It will cut you to the core if you listen."
Winnie viewed their elemental magic not as a divine gift, not as a tool, but as a fatal parasite. like a terminal disease that had to be hidden, starved, and never, ever used.
She spent her entire life trying to make Jude mundane, dyeing Jude's hair, keeping her isolated from other children, moving constantly, all just trying to suppress the inevitable explosion of that nuclear reactor.
You know, usually when we talk about trauma or medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, like engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is, broken. It's clean, it's binary.
We like things to be visible. We like it to be neatly categorized so we can apply a specific targeted fix.
Right, but then you step into Jude's world. You step into the landscape of complex PTSD, of repressed memory, of a totally hollowed-out identity, and suddenly that x-ray machine is useless.
You can't just take an x-ray of a generational curse.
Exactly. You can't put a stethoscope to a soul that's been deliberately emptied out for 17 years. And this leads to this profound, crushing sense of emptiness in Jude.
When we catch up with her in modern-day Seattle, she is at absolute rock bottom. The consequences of repressing a core part of her identity have completely caught up with her.
She is in a state of total collapse. She recently suffered a deeply traumatic miscarriage, which feels to her like another failure of her own body, another branch of the Cole family dying.
And her long-term boyfriend, Roger, just packed up his life, his sensible shoes and alpaca sweaters, and left her.
He didn't leave because they fought, right? He left because he could sense the vast, chilling void inside her.
Yeah, he couldn't connect with someone who was so fundamentally disconnected from herself.
And so Jude makes a plan. She is actively experiencing severe suicidal ideation. She plans to go to her empty apartment, take a massive stash of hoarded pills, drink a bottle of vodka, and just return to the quiet nothingness she felt for those 17 minutes when she died in the fire.
Psychologically, she isn't even looking for death as a dramatic end. She is trying to recreate that specific 17-minute window of death because it was the only time in her entire life she felt a genuine release from the suffocating, terrifying pressure of her lineage and her dormant magic.
It was the only time the reactor was fully shut down.
Precisely. So, on her final night, she goes to a local shop called Orman Used and Rare Books. She intends to buy a vintage copy of Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar to read as the pills take effect.
Which is a highly poignant, deliberate choice of literature, given the book's themes of a young woman quietly, inevitably coming apart at the seams under the weight of societal and internal expectations.
But instead of finding oblivion, she finds an invitation.
Yes. She opens the book, and a physical invitation to a different kind of darkness slips out from between the pages.
It's this thick, luxurious black envelope, and written on it in gleaming gold script is her true name, Judeth Cole, a name she hasn't spoken or used in over a decade.
And the invitation inside contains a single, incredibly compelling directive. It reads, "Learn what waits in the deep."
And it instructs her to go beneath the Ravenna Park Bridge at midnight.
Which is just such a brilliant narrative pivot. She is standing at a literal life-or-death crossroads. Option A, go home to the empty apartment, take the pills, and fade to black. Option B, follow the impossible, mysterious black envelope that somehow knows her real name and walk into a dark, wooded park in the middle of the night.
And she chooses the park. She chooses curiosity over death. And that choice brings her face to face with the Fathom.
The Fathom. Okay, let's talk about them. They're a tight-knit circle of underground magical practitioners operating in Seattle. And they're led by a woman named Arla T. Wells.
And Arla is everything Jude is not. Arla is charismatic, she is unapologetic, she is manipulative, and she is completely gravitationally magnetic.
When Jude steps out of the shadows under that bridge and meets them, it is a paradigm-shifting revelation. For the very first time in her life, Jude realizes she isn't an anomaly.
She isn't a freak. She isn't the only person walking around with these terrifying abilities.
Let's dig into the actual mechanics of this group, because Morgyn builds out the magic system here with incredible specificity. It's not just everyone can cast spells.
Yeah.
Everyone has a highly specific, inherent affinity related to the elements or the mind.
Right. Jude, as we know, is a fire rover, meaning she has pyrokinesis, the ability to summon and manipulate fire, and electrokinesis, the ability to control electrical currents.
And Arla, the leader, is a water diviner, able to pull moisture from the air, manipulate bodies of water, and use it as both a weapon and a shield.
Then there is Brennan, who operates as the quiet observer of the group. He is a catalyst, which in this universe means he has telekinesis. He can move physical objects with his mind, manipulate kinetic energy, and exert physical force without touching anything.
And then we have Cadence, who I think is one of the most fascinating characters in the entire novel.
Oh, absolutely.
Cadence is an oracle. She has precognition, she gets flashes of the future, and she has profound psychic abilities. But what makes Cadence so compelling is that she's also autistic.
And Morgan doesn't just treat her autism as a background character trait. She ties it uniquely and intimately into how her magic functions and how she experiences the world.
That intersection of neurodivergence and magic is handled with such incredible depth. For Cadence, sensory overload isn't just about environmental factors like bright lights or loud noises, though those are definitely present.
Her sensory overload is overwhelmingly psychic. She is constantly, relentlessly bombarded by the psychic data of the world around her.
She feels the echoing emotions of people in a room. She gets unbidden, chaotic flashes of their potential futures. She feels the residual energetic trauma left in physical spaces. Her brain is processing magical and emotional stimuli at a rate that is completely exhausting.
It makes complete sense why she would be drawn to a group like the Fathom. She needs a buffer. She needs people who understand that her overwhelm isn't an overreaction. It's a very real response to a very loud, magical world.
And rounding out the group, we have the twins. Twig, who is a night bearer, with the ability to literally cloak herself and others in deep, impenetrable shadows.
And Rock, who is a dream spinner, capable of conjuring vivid illusions, manipulating memories, and projecting waking nightmares into people's minds.
They operate as this deeply bonded, exclusive unit. But if we step back and look at the psychological architecture of this group, what we are seeing is an absolute masterclass in the dynamics of cults and toxic found families.
Yeah, Arla is a predator, and she preys precisely on their profound isolation. Look at Jude's state of mind when they meet.
Jude wants to die because she feels entirely empty, fundamentally broken, and completely alone.
And Arla steps in and offers her a lifeline. She offers Jude purpose. She offers her the promise of mastering her power instead of fearing it.
But most importantly, Arla offers a community where Jude doesn't have to hide the darkest, most dangerous parts of herself. It's the ultimate seduction. It's so intoxicating.
Arla looks at Jude and tells her, "In one another's presence, we are safe to be exactly as we are."
And Morgan introduces this fascinating biological concept of magical radiation. Just by being in the physical proximity of these other magic users, Jude's internal belief circuit gets hacked.
Her pyrokinesis, which has been dead and buried for 17 years, slowly starts to crackle back to life just from standing near Arla and the others.
It's like her dormant nuclear reactor is being jump-started by the ambient radiation of their energy.
Exactly. The magic recognizes magic. But as the story unfolds, we realize Arla's motivations aren't purely altruistic. She didn't gather these lost souls just to give them a safe harbor.
No, she definitely didn't. Brennan, the telekinetic catalyst, is highly observant, and he starts to notice a deeply disturbing pattern in Arla's abilities.
He confides in Jude that when he first met Arla years ago, she was a very talented water diviner, but that was it, just water.
But as each new member joined the circle, as they spent more time together, Arla's personal abilities seemed to inexplicably expand.
Right, she started showing faint signs of telekinesis, just like Brennan. Then she developed psychic resistance, blocking Cadence out. Then she showed an aptitude for shadow manipulation, mimicking Twig.
And this is where the dynamic shifts from found family to parasitic host. Brennan suspects Arla is secretly siphoning their magic. It honestly reminds me of a ruthless tech CEO.
Oh, how so?
You have this massive monolithic corporation that aggressively absorbs smaller, innovative startup companies. They don't buy the startups to foster a diverse tech community. They buy them to eliminate the competition, dismantle the teams, and quietly hoard all their intellectual property, their IP, to make the central CEO more powerful.
That is a highly accurate modern translation of what's happening on a supernatural level. Arla is acting like a corporate monopoly. She's absorbing their magical IP.
And to facilitate this massive gathering of energy, Arla needs a controlled environment. So she runs a highly exclusive, fiercely guarded underground club called Medusa.
It is a BDSM, fetish, and occult club that caters to the extremely wealthy and powerful elite of Seattle.
Right. And when Jude is brought into Medusa, she is desperately trying to figure out how this intense club environment fits into the magic system. Because magic requires fuel, right? And you look at Medusa, it is an environment saturated with raw lust, physical pain, absolute surrender, and complete sensory chaos. You have people shedding their societal masks, giving in to their most primal urges.
So the question becomes, is Medusa acting as a giant kinetic battery for the Fathom's magic? Is Arla feeding off the intense, unfiltered emotional and physical energy of the patrons? Are endorphins and adrenaline acting as magical fuel?
It is the most logical assumption Jude can make, and she's not entirely wrong.
No, the club absolutely acts as a generator of chaos and raw human emotion, which makes magic easier to access. The sheer kinetic energy of that much uninhibited humanity creates a localized thinning of the veil, so to speak.
But Jude is missing the larger, far more terrifying picture. Arla's rapidly expanding power isn't just coming from the club's wealthy patrons.
And she isn't just skimming off the top of her friend's magic.
The Medusa Club is just a symptom. It's a cover story. The true source of Arla's terrifying power is much, much older, and it is drawing from something incredibly ancient, trapped beneath their very feet.
Which brings us to the most terrifying part of this deep dive. The monster in the well.
Yes. After Jude proves herself, Arla decides she is finally ready to see the truth behind the Fathom's power. Arla takes Jude away from the noise and neon of the club, leading her down into the flooded, centuries-old, forgotten basement beneath Medusa.
And sitting dead in the center of this damp, oppressive room is a massive, locked iron well.
It's covered in thick purple slime mold, is visibly radiating intense heat, and it is surrounded by ancient Aramaic script that is literally glowing from within the mortar of the bricks.
It is a scene constructed straight out of high-end cosmic horror. The atmosphere is suffocating.
Arla approaches the well and lifts the incredibly heavy iron lid. She tells Jude to look into the black water.
Initially, Jude leans over and the water acts as a mirror. But she doesn't see her own reflection. She sees a perfect, pristine reflection of Solidago, her grandfather's estate, exactly as it was before the fire.
The entity is immediately pulling from Jude's deepest subconscious trauma. But then the water violently churns. The vision shatters, and the entity itself physically emerges.
The physical description of this thing is wild. It's a grotesque, shape-shifting amalgamation.
First, a dorsal fin splits the surface of the black water, and it's spiked with the long, venomous black spines of a sea urchin.
Then the body heaves up, revealing the mottled, electrified, translucent flesh of a deep-sea eel.
And finally, as it rises further, it reveals the long, dark, tangled hair and the terrifyingly beautiful face of a siren. It is mesmerizing and monstrous all at once.
And as Jude is reeling in horror, Arla calmly reveals that this entity was summoned and trapped in this brick, decades ago, by a man named Edward Rudsiton.
Rudsiton was a previous catalyst, a powerful telekinetic like Brennan, and a deeply obsessed demonologist.
Which forces us to ask the critical question of the novel. What exactly is this entity?
Arla arrogantly calls it a demon. Sometimes she calls it a dragon. She uses words that imply something evil, but ultimately manageable. A beast that can be chained.
But Morgyn uses another character, an eccentric, deeply intuitive artist named Eneli, to provide the vital, terrifying, mythological context that Arla is ignoring.
Eneli paints massive, disturbing portraits of primordial goddesses, and she specifically talks to Jude about two figures.
Thlassa, the ancient Greek primordial goddess of the sea, and Achatni, a terrifying, ancient, cannibalistic deity of the Sami people of the Arctic who resides in the darkest depths.
Eneli goes out of her way to explain that these primordial goddesses aren't like the civilized anthropomorphic gods of later mythologies. They aren't like Zeus or Athena, who get married, have petty arguments, and have distinct, neat little domains.
Precisely. These older primordial beings represent the void. They represent dark matter. They represent the absolute chaos that existed before the universe was ordered.
They are ungovernable forces of nature. They do not possess human morality. They aren't evil in the way a demon is evil. They are destructive in the way a hurricane is destructive.
They represent our deepest, most primal human fears. The consuming nature of fire, the blinding terror of the night, the crushing pressure of the deep ocean, the unpredictability of magic, and ultimately, death itself.
Eneli connects the entity in the well to the concept of thalassophobia, which is the profound, instinctual terror of deep, dark bodies of water and the unknown horrors that lurk beneath them.
She also ties it to the esoteric Kabbalistic concept of ayin, which represents the absolute darkness and infinite nothingness that precedes the light of creation. It is the cosmic void from which all things originate, and crucially, the void to which all things must violently return.
Wait, I have to challenge this concept for a second, because if we are saying this entity, this Fathom, is pure, unadulterated chaos, right? A primordial force of nature that predates creation.
Right.
If it is so completely ungovernable, how on earth did some guy named Edward Rudsiton manage to lock it in a brick well in a Seattle basement? Doesn't the very fact that it is currently trapped in a well imply that it can be governed, that it can be contained? It feels like a contradiction.
That is the exact right question to ask, and it gets to the absolute heart of why the Fathom is so dangerous in the present timeline. Because Rudzidin didn't tame it. He didn't govern it. He achieved a temporary, violently unstable stalemate.
He built a pressure cooker.
Exactly. He used ancient, incredibly costly blood magic to create a temporary seal, but the very nature of chaos is that it expands. It rots whatever container you put it in.
That's why the bricks are cracking. That's why the Aramaic script is glowing. The spell's overheating.
The containment is failing because you cannot put a static cage around infinite expansion. It costs Rudzidin everything to lock it away, and the bill for that containment is finally coming due.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. I look at it like trying to trap a Category 5 hurricane in a glass jar. You might be a brilliant wizard who figures out a way to magically force that hurricane into the jar. You might even be able to contain it for a split second, or maybe even a few decades if your glass is magically reinforced.
But the fundamental nature of a hurricane is to spin, to expand, and to destroy.
The glass will inevitably, violently shatter. You cannot govern the ungovernable. It's just a countdown to an explosion.
And the Fathom confirms this chaotic, expansive nature herself. Shortly after seeing the well, Jude experiences a deeply unsettling, invasive dream sequence where the Fathom pulls her consciousness into a shared psychic space.
In this dream, the Fathom refuses to hold a single shape. She shapeshifts rapidly and violently.
She appears as Dara, Jude's innocent childhood friend. Then she shifts into Arla, then into the artist, Anelli, then into a terrifying, fire-breathing dragon.
And finally, she shifts into Aurelia, Jude's grandmother. And the Fathom speaks to Jude, telling her, "I am a multitude, an expression of something too vast for you to comprehend."
It's such a chilling line, I am a multitude, because it tells us exactly what magic is in this universe.
Magic isn't a tool you can buy at a hardware store. Magic is a direct expression of that primordial chaos in creation. It is fundamentally wild. It cannot be owned. It can only be channeled, and even then at great personal risk.
But Arla fundamentally, arrogantly disagrees with that assessment. Arla suffers from the ultimate hubris. She believes she can own it.
She looks at Jude and says, "She is the magic, and I hold her in the palm of my hands."
Arla managed to find Edward Rudzidin's hidden journal, which serves as a dark instruction manual for the original binding spell that trapped the Fathom.
But as we noted, the spell is failing. The centuries-old bricks are cracking under the pressure. So to rewrite the spell, to reinforce the glass jar and secure her ultimate godlike power forever, Arla needs to perform a maintenance ritual.
She needs to create a very specific, gruesome, magical pigment to permanently seal the cracking bricks.
Which means Arla has to rely on the oldest, darkest laws of magic. And in this universe, the oldest law is written in blood.
So let's look at how the actual mechanics of a magical binding work, because this is where the Gothic thriller elements shift into sheer, undeniable horror.
To truly understand what Arla is attempting to do in that basement, we actually have to look backward. We have to look at the tragedy of Jude's grandmother, Aurelia.
Jude has been running from her family history, but she finally forces herself to learn the truth about her grandparents from a local Oregon woman named Mira, and eventually from communicating with the lingering psychic ghost of Aurelia herself.
The tragedy of Aurelia is the absolute crux of the Cole family's generational curse. Aurelia was a powerful elemental witch, and she was deeply, desperately in love with McAllister Bates.
But McAllister was a heartless, cruel, philandering man who could not give her the devotion she craved.
Driven to despair by the fear of losing him, Aurelia broke the cardinal, unspoken rule of the Cole women. She actively used her immense power for selfish gain. She gathered her elemental magic and cast a love spell to permanently bind McAllister to her.
But, as we've established, the magic in this world is literal, and it is entirely unforgiving. It doesn't understand nuance or romance.
If you cast a love spell to bind the free will of a man who is completely incapable of experiencing genuine love, the magic warps, it sours.
It doesn't create a fairy tale romance. It creates a dark, oppressive, toxic possession. McAllister didn't fall in love with her. He became insanely, violently obsessed with her.
He viewed her as an object he had to protect from the world. He built the sprawling estate of Solidago, not as a shared home, but as a literal cage to keep her entirely to himself.
The spell worked too well. It turned him into a monster. Aurelia was trapped by the consequences of her own magic.
And eventually, the despair became so absolute that she threw herself from the jagged cliffs into the freezing sea to try and break the spell through her own death.
But the horror of it is it didn't work. The binding held even after she died, corrupting McAllister further, turning him into a tyrant and poisoning the entire life of Jude's mother, Winnie.
This rich historical context is absolutely vital for understanding the strict rules of magic Morgan establishes for the climax of the book.
Morgan lays out that there are 4 distinct types of blood used in magical rituals. To bind something, meaning to forcefully, permanently trap a conscious entity against its will, you require the most potent form, blood taken.
Which explicitly means murder. It requires an unwilling sacrifice. The violence of the act fuels the binding.
And to bind an entity as ancient and powerful as a primordial sea goddess, mundane human blood simply won't hold the charge. You need highly concentrated magical blood.
Oh my God. Which leads Jude, and you, the listener, to the chilling, horrifying realization that Brennan, the observant telekinetic, was right all along. But he didn't realize just how right he was.
Arla didn't gather the Fathom circle to build a supportive community, and she didn't gather them just to act as a parasite and siphon their ambient energy to learn new tricks.
She gathered them to act as livestock. She gathered them to harvest their magical blood. They are the literal ingredients she needs for her binding pigment.
It is a devastating betrayal, and the brilliant part of Morgan's writing is that the clues were there all along, hiding in plain sight.
Like with her father. We learned that Arla's own father, who was abusive, mysteriously drowned in a shallow 3-foot decorative fountain years ago.
It becomes obvious that Arla used him as blood taken to initiate her own violent awakening.
We learn that the ghost of the demonologist, Edward Rudsiton, still haunts the flooded basement of Medusa because when his original binding spell started failing decades ago, he sacrificed himself.
He threw his own body into the well to buy a few more years of containment. The magic demands a toll.
And the absolute horrific confirmation of Arla's plan comes when Brennan, Twig, and Rock suddenly disappear from the club. Jude investigates, and she discovers their drained bodies.
Arla has harvested them. Their magical blood has been used to literally paint the ancient Aramaic symbols onto the walls of the basement.
It's sickening. So we have to ask, what does this all mean for Arla's character arc? It means Arla is perfectly tragically mirroring Jude's grandfather, McAllister Bates.
Arla sought out magical power initially to escape the trauma of her abusive father, just as McAllister sought financial and physical control to soothe his own insecurities.
But just as McAllister caged Aurelia out of a toxic, all-consuming lust for control, Arla is caging the Fathom out of a lust for ultimate unchecked power.
Arla looked at the abuse she suffered and decided the only way to never be a victim again was to become the ultimate abuser. She has perpetuated the cycle of violence on a cosmic scale.
The psychological and physical tension reaches its absolute peak during a public BDSM stage performance at the Medusa Club. This scene is incredibly stressful to read.
Arla orchestrates a brutal public test of loyalty. She uses her stolen telekinesis to physically suspend Cadence, this autistic oracle, high above the stage in front of a cheering mass crowd who think it's just part of the show.
Arla hands Jude a ceremonial sacrificial dagger, and she demands that Jude slit Cadence's throat. Arla tells Jude it's time to pay her dues.
She states the rule of the circle: blood in, blood out. She needs Jude to cross the line into murder to secure her loyalty and provide the final blood needed for the ritual.
It is the ultimate moral crossroads for Jude. We have to remember where Jude started. Arla is offering Jude everything she ever wanted when she was standing on that bridge contemplating suicide.
Arla is offering limitless, unfettered magical power. She is offering permanent freedom from the trauma of her past. She is offering a permanent place in the inner circle where Jude will never feel empty again.
All she has to do is commit one act of murder. All she has to do is provide blood taken.
It's a test of Jude's fundamental morality versus her desperate desire to feel whole through magic. It forces Jude to finally reckon with the fear her mother instilled in her, the fear that she, and all Cole women, are inherently biologically evil because of their power.
But in this crucial moment, Jude refuses. She looks at the dagger, she looks at Cadence, and she realizes that partaking in this violent ritual wouldn't free her. It would bind her.
It would bind her soul to the Fathom and to Arla in a cycle of bloodshed she could never, ever escape. She would truly become the monster her mother feared she was.
Jude drops the knife. She refuses to be a killer. Through a desperate burst of her returning electrokinesis, she miraculously manages to shatter the stage lights, rescue Cadence, and they flee the club into the Seattle night, setting the stage for the final apocalyptic climax.
The climax of this book is just a breathless, cinematic sequence. Jude realizes she can't just run. If Arla completes the binding, she will become unstoppable.
So Jude teams up with Levi. Levi is this wonderfully grounded, local bookseller she met earlier in the story. He has a deep background in esoteric antiquities, and he is the one who helped Jude decode the ancient Aramaic script on the well.
He represents the mundane world, but he chooses to stand with her. She also has Cadence, who is finally free from Arla's oppressive psychic suppression and is using her precognition to guide them.
But Arla is desperate. The spell is failing faster now. She specifically needs Jude's fire affinity blood to complete the elemental binding pigment.
So Arla uses her shadows to kidnap Levi, forcing Jude's hand. If Jude wants to save the man she's falling in love with, she has to return to the basement.
When Jude descends into that flooded basement for the final showdown, the imagery is pure Gothic nightmare fuel. Arla is standing by the well, physically covered in the dried, magical blood of Brennan, twig, and rock.
She is completely manic, her eyes are wild, and she is practically vibrating with the stolen, unstable power of her murdered friends. She is frantically attempting to paint the final symbols to seal the cracking bricks, completely consumed by the delusion that she can become the Fathom herself.
But Arla made a fatal miscalculation. She focused entirely on the power of violence. Jude, however, has figured out the fundamental loophole in the magic system. She figured out the secret to unbinding.
During that psychic dream state conversation she had with the ghost of her grandmother, Aurelia, Jude learned the ultimate cosmic truth of how their elemental magic balances itself. Opposing forces cancel each other out.
It's magical physics. If blood taken, murder, violence, forced sacrifice creates a binding, then the exact opposite action must break it.
Therefore, blood freely given, a willing, selfless sacrifice made out of love or necessity, without coercion, can shatter a binding.
The mechanics of how this final confrontation plays out are brilliantly executed by Morgyn. It isn't just a generic wizard duel where they shoot fire and water at each other.
Jude realizes she cannot overpower Arla with brute force. Arla has absorbed too much magic. Instead, Jude uses her connection to her murdered friends.
She taps into the residual, lingering magic left behind by Brennan. She channels his telekinetic power to literally snatch the heavy magical key out of Arla's hand from across the room. It's a moment of profound reclamation.
And then Jude doesn't attack Arla. Jude takes the sacrificial dagger, looks at the well, and deliberately deeply slices her own palm.
She bleeds willingly, entirely by choice, letting her blood drip onto the heavy iron dogs holding the well's lid shut.
Blood freely given. The iron dogs instantly unlock with a deafening crack, and the explosive finale begins.
The Fathom, the primordial embodiment of chaos and dark matter, finally breaks free from decades of containment. It is an apocalyptic scene. The massive stone well violently explodes outward.
Millions of gallons of pressurized black seawater surge up from the earth, instantly flooding and destroying the basement. Jude's fire erupts, clashing with the water, creating blinding, scalding steam as the primordial chaos is fully unleashed into the physical world.
The structural integrity of the Medusa Club above them completely fails, and the entire building begins to collapse. And in the dead center of this unimaginable destruction, the Fathom rises up, grabs Arla, and consumes her.
It drags Arla down into the endless, crushing void she so arrogantly thought she could control. Meanwhile, Jude uses the absolute limit of her telekinesis and fire to blast a path through the collapsing rubble, managing to drag Levi to the surface and save his life.
There is a beautiful, profound, and deeply satisfying irony to this resolution. Think about Jude's entire character arc. For her entire life, for 17 agonizing years, Jude spent every waking moment running from her magic.
She starved herself of her own identity, terrified that her pyrokinesis was a cursed, evil thing that would inevitably result in her destroying herself and everyone she ever dared to love.
But in the end, it isn't her repression that saves her. It is her complete acceptance of her magic and her courageous willingness to surrender it freely and selflessly that ultimately saves her life and saves Levi's.
I love that. It's exactly like the physics of leaning into a skid when you're driving on a sheet of black ice.
Your immediate panicked instinct is to fight the steering wheel, to jerk it violently in the opposite direction of the skid. But any driving instructor will tell you that fighting the momentum is exactly what causes the car to flip and crash.
Surrendering to the skid, momentarily taking your foot off the brake, leaning into the terrifying momentum that is literally the only way your tires catch traction and you get your control back.
For 17 years, Jude fought the wheel. In that basement, with the water rising, Jude finally leaned into her magic.
And we look at the quiet aftermath of that explosion. The thematic resonance of the novel is perfectly resolved. Jude doesn't miraculously lose her magic by freeing the Fathom. She is still a fire rover.
But by breaking the violent binding of the well through an act of selfless sacrifice, she simultaneously breaks the psychological and magical generational curse of her grandmother.
She finally understands the truth that eluded Aurelia and terrified her mother. Power itself isn't inherently evil. Magic isn't a curse. It is a neutral force.
It is the selfish, arrogant desire to control and dominate others with that power that corrupts the soul. Arla Wells and McAllister Bates were both utterly destroyed by their desperate, toxic need to cage what they couldn't understand. Jude is saved, fundamentally, by her willingness to let it go.
As the dust settles on the smoking, flooded ruins of the Medusa Club, Jude Clark is fundamentally changed. She is no longer an empty vessel. She is no longer the girl sitting in the hospital chair refusing to participate in her own life.
She is carrying the massive, terrifying legacy of the deep within her. But the crucial difference is that she is now carrying it by choice. She owns it. It doesn't own her.
To summarize this incredible narrative arc, because it is just so well crafted, Jude begins the story as an empty shell of a woman defined entirely by her trauma, her paralyzing fear, and a desperate, quiet desire for oblivion.
By the end of the book, she is a woman who actively stares down an ancient primordial sea goddess, a literal embodiment of chaos and death, and she walks away with her soul completely intact and her capacity to love restored.
It's a gorgeous journey of profound reclamation. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you were told were too dangerous to exist.
And the core theme here extends far beyond the supernatural elements of the fantasy genre. Ava Morgyn is using this gothic thriller to tell us something deeply true about the human condition.
She is telling us that we all have a fathom locked inside us. We all carry deep, untamed emotions. We all carry unresolved trauma or perhaps a latent, fierce personal power that scares us.
If we lock those things away in a dark psychological basement, if we violently refuse to look at them or acknowledge their existence, they do not disappear. They turn monstrous in the dark.
They begin to fester, and eventually they demand blood. They demand a toll on our mental health and our relationships.
But if we have the courage to unlock the well, to acknowledge those dark parts, to bring them into the light and let them breathe without trying to control them, they stop being monsters. They integrate, and they become a source of immense, undeniable strength.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to really mull over. Throughout the book, the Fathom tells Jude, I am a multitude. Think about that. We are all a multitude. We are not just one simple, easily digestible thing.
I want you to think about the parts of your own identity that you actively keep locked away in the dark. Maybe it's a fiercely creative passion you abandoned.
Maybe it's a completely valid, burning anger about how you were treated in the past. Maybe it's a strange quirk or a fundamental truth about who you are that society or your family or even your partner deemed too much or too intense.
What would happen if you finally stopped trying to cage your own inner dragon?
If you finally took a breath, unlocked the iron door, and let it out, would it burn your life down to the ashes? Or would it finally, after all these years, teach you how to fly?
A truly powerful, necessary question to carry forward into your own life.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I cannot recommend this book enough. I highly encourage you to go out and pick up a copy of Only Spelled Deep by Ava Morgyn to experience this dark, beautiful, complicated magic for yourself. And remember, sometimes the absolute only way to truly heal a broken bone or a profoundly broken soul is to finally find the courage to look directly at the X-ray. See you next time.